Okay, our next unit is global ecology, and we have 3 objectives, although the first one we've already done, is to calculate the transfer of energy using energy pyramids, and that's that 10% rule. What we're going to focus on today is examine the processes involved in nutrient recycling, including the carbon, nitrogen, and water cycle. And then our last objective is to identify the role of microorganisms in food production. This lecture is going to focus on this middle objective, and we're going to be looking at the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, and the water cycle. So I want to start by just talking about conservation of matter and conservation of energy. And these are laws that tell us that matter is not created nor destroyed. It can be converted from one form to another, but we can't just create it. And energy is the same way. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, but it can be transferred from one form to another. And how these move throughout the biosphere is different. Energy flows, which means that energy is not going to cycle back to where it started. The ultimate source of energy for life on Earth is the sun, but all organisms need to take in energy, so plants can use the sun's energy, animals rely on eating the plants, but all of these organisms are releasing energy in the form of heat and utilizing energy for their metabolism, and so we have to continually have energy coming into the system. So we have to continually eat, plants have to continue to do photosynthesis. Matter, on the other hand, is recycled. So matter actually comes back, and so a carbon atom that's in the air in the form of carbon dioxide can end up in an animal, end up in a plant, end up back in another animal, end up back into the atmosphere. It's recycled throughout all of the ecosystems. So we call these biogeochemical cycles. And these biogeochemical cycles are named that because bio, they're going to go through living things. Geo, oops, we go bio. Geo, it's going to go through land and water. And then finally the chemical part of it is it goes into, forms different compounds by combining with different elements. So all of these biogeochemical cycles, we're going to see how water, for instance, is in living things, goes through the land or the water, and then maybe combined with other things to make different chemicals. And the same thing with the carbon and the nitrogen cycle. So we'll start with the water cycle, and the water cycle is probably the most familiar to you. But there are 3 parts of it that I want you to be familiar with, and 2 of them I think you already know. So evaporation. So from the lakes and the oceans and streams and whatnot, water evaporates, and so what that means is it goes from a liquid to a gas, and then in the clouds it's going to condense, and then it'll precipitate down in the form of snow, rain, sleet, whatever. So I think those you're familiar with. So evaporation is going from a liquid to a gas. Precipitation is now going from the gaseous form down into back onto land. The part that you're probably not familiar with is transpiration. And transpiration is a process that plants do. So plants are taking up water from the soil to their roots, and that water is moving through their body tissues, and eventually it goes to the leaf and it's evaporated at the leaf. And that is transpiration, that movement of water from the roots of plants through the body of the plant to the leaf. And then that water ends up back into the atmosphere through a process called transpiration. So those are the 3 processes that I want you to know for the water cycle. The carbon cycle, the 2 major processes that I want you to know are photosynthesis and cellular respiration. So carbon dioxide is in the atmosphere, and we cannot use that carbon directly, but plants and other photosynthetic organisms, autotrophs, can. So the process of photosynthesis, they fix the carbon or convert it into a usable form. So plants are taking that carbon dioxide and making sugars, basically, and other organic compounds. And then we can eat those organic compounds. The carbon gets released back into the atmosphere through a process called cellular respiration. And that's when those sugars and other molecules are being used for energy. Plants and animals do cellular respiration to provide the energy that their bodies need. And in that process, they're releasing the carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. This reaction is very similar to combustion, which you learned about last year. And there are other sources where the carbon dioxide is being cycled through but what I want you to be familiar with is cellular respiration and photosynthesis. So what do we need carbon for in our bodies? So hopefully you said that carbon is the central molecule for all the organic compounds in our body. Alright, and this is just an overview showing you the two processes, cellular respiration and photosynthesis. I'm going to start with cellular respiration. So we take plants and animals, all living things take sugars, and we use oxygen gas to break those down, and we release carbon dioxide and water in the process. And what we're getting out of that is ATP. ATP is usable energy for the organism. We talked about ATP in a different unit. It's like energy currency. This is like a bank account where you're saving money. This is like the coins or the cash that you can actually use directly for energy. This is like energy stored, and this is usable energy. Plants are doing kind of the opposite. So the plants are starting with the carbon dioxide and the water. They're using light energy, and they're able to make sugars, and they release oxygen gas in the process. So those are the two processes in the carbon cycle. Some organisms release energy from food without oxygen, and we call that process anaerobic, or if you put an A and an N in front of a word, it negates it. So we had aerobic respiration, this would be no oxygen respiration. And another term for that is fermentation. So some microbes use fermentation to release the energy from the food. There's less energy produced in the process, but they don't need oxygen gas to do this. And most of the organisms that do this are very small, so they don't need a lot of energy. And so some of the foods that you eat that are actually fermented, you may not be aware of, is yogurt, coffee, chocolate, cheeses, alcoholic beverages, and a whole slew of other things are actually the taste that we have as a result of the fermentation process. And we're going to come back to that. That's our last objective, really. Okay, the nitrogen cycle is important because nitrogen is the most abundant molecule in the atmosphere, and we need it, but we can't use it. Plants can't directly use nitrogen gas. We can't directly use nitrogen gas. But fortunately for us, there are bacteria that are capable of nitrogen fixation for converting nitrogen into a usable form. And so they convert it into forms that the plants can take up, and then the herbivores eat the plants, carnivores eat those animals, omnivores are eating both the animals and the plants, and they can get their nitrogen that way. So what do we need nitrogen for? So hopefully you remember that nitrogen is found in amino acids, which are found in proteins, and that proteins are the most abundant organic molecule in your body. So you need a lot of nitrogen to make all the body parts that you're made up of. And the last one is the phosphorus cycle, and I'm not going to ask you to know any of the steps in the phosphorus cycle, but I want you to know that phosphorus is needed in our bodies, and it is also cycled. And do you remember where we need phosphorus for? Phosphorus are found in those phosphate groups are part of the nucleic acids. They're part of the nucleotides that make up your RNA and your DNA. So that also just gets cycled. And all you need to know is that all of these things are cycled. All of the organic compounds are cycled. Okay, so that wraps it up. So we just did examining the processes involved in nutrient recycling, including carbon, nitrogen, and the water cycle. And we touched on the role of microorganisms in food production, and we're going to come back to that. I'm not going to actually do a lecture on that, but you'll be responsible for that objective as well. And that's it.